say this much for Cruella. For a moderately expensive-looking movie that one has to assume came about chiefly from Disney knowing their classic villains move the most merchandise of anything they've got with the prized adult women demographic, and thus the basic existence of a pumped-up, not necessarily for babies exclusively Cruella de Vil rebrand is a license to print money off owning an entire market percentage of black and white clothing as a concept from now to forever. Seriously, watching this thing is like watching Hot Topic add floor space in real time. I can't say it doesn't also try to innovate, in that I'm not sure I've ever seen a movie actually try to be-rabbit itself against critical apprehension, for those not down with the 8 Mile reference.
I know everything he's got to say against me. I am white, I am a fucking punk. I do live in a trailer with my mom. Fuck this battle, I don't want to win, I'm outie. Here, tell these people something they don't know about me.
But yeah, starting off and continuing through the film, you can feel Cruella trying to be very clever about just how much it gets that a certain percentage of the audience is coming into it with a severely skeptical eye in terms of, are we really doing the villain origin where they're actually a sympathetic anti-hero thing for the one-dimensional puppy killer lady? And so at about the 9.5-minute mark, they seemingly decide to just go with the stupidest possible version of their own premise, as in, if you were writing a satire of stupid origin story movies and Cruella de Vil was your subject, this would be the most obvious joke you could do about it. And then somehow find the achromatic spotted balls to keep going, like, yeah, all the way down here is where we're starting, now watch what we build on it. And impressively, that almost works. In any case, we are indeed back in Maleficent territory, aka Mickey's been keeping up on his gender studies and figured, well, shit, if our stuff is gonna get feminist deconstructions, we might as well do it ourselves and get the money for it. Though this one is nowhere near as dark as that one, you have to imagine Angelina Jolie, and only Angelina Jolie could tell the mouse we're doing this as a fantasy rape revenge movie and get him to say okay, and in lieu of the actual story, this is more like a new narrative remixed from characters and plot details of 101 Dalmatians that's also structured so that it could conceivably be a prequel to the original, but is mainly an origin movie for a reimagined version of the previously backstory-free iconic villain, all hinged, as with Maleficent, on the central spectacle of a charismatic lead actress doing a turn as the title character that recontextualizes their signature Wicked Witch affects into reclaimed aesthetics of female self-empowerment. So whereas cartoon Cruella was framed as symbolic of hedonism giving way to moral rot, i.e. a single childless woman of decadent and debauched elitist affect invades the lives of a homey middle-class couple and counters their more or less children and sees only a resource to exploit for vanity and profit, because what other kind of personality could you possibly have from being single, childless, decadent, and a woman, according to 1960s Disney storytelling? Live-action Cruella is a free-thinking bad girl who has to be ruthless and violent because becoming something like a supervillain is the only path a woman in her sphere has to agency on her own terms, and how dare you suggest that she doesn't also deserve to live well while doing so? I mean, you were expecting them to make literally anything else from this? Anyway, our ostensible setup is that Emma Stone's character is actually named Estella, an orphan master pickpocket in mid-70s London who's carrying around a bunch of guilt because of an incomplete memory suggesting she accidentally caused her mother's death by making trouble at a fancy party as a young girl, and is now a young adult attempting to transition from her street hustler life to her actual dream of working in high fashion, having finagled a job with Emma Thompson's The Baroness, a wealthy and famous fashion designer. The main thrust of the story eventually gets going as Estella comes to realize that it was the Baroness whose party her mother died at, and that she was the true architect of what happened that night. Thus, Estella hatches a scheme to seek revenge by destroying the Baroness' fortune, business, and reputation from inside and out, and creates the Cruella de Vil persona as a cover, an edgy, mischievous, new school fashion queen hailing from London's emerging punk rock underground scene who taunts the Baroness as a relic while staging mischievous public pranks against her various fashion showcases. But as the war of girl boss versus girl boss but being performatively ironic about it rages on, Estella finds herself slipping easier and easier into Cruella full-time while simultaneously reckoning with the Baroness maybe not being 100% full of shit when she claims to actually admire the new enemy, that the two of them maybe aren't that different overall, and thus whether or not Cruella de Vil has been the real one all along, the lingering mystery of why her mother needed to die and what connects them to the Baroness in the first place. You've seen a movie before, right? You get where this is all going? And also, yes, there's a bit of business about stealing back a MacGuffin that belonged to Cruella's mother, which necessitates a running subplot about abducting the Baroness' prized Dalmatian attack dogs, which ends up playing out somewhat awkwardly because it really feels like there was meant to be a fake out in terms of, wait, are they really still gonna, that was maybe supposed to be drawn out longer as part of an is our character maybe an actual psychopath, and if so, how much back and forth narrative that they clearly want for the main arc, but it's also explicitly defanged well in advance of ever taking shape, part of an overall sense one gets that maybe this was going in a much darker, more ambiguous direction before someone said, you might not get the audience back after that. But in the end, the film is very much committed to being a showcase for this you may now cosplay, buy merch, and otherwise stan without feeling vaguely gross version of Cruella, and thus everything eventually bends towards Stone's performance, where she more than carries the proceedings in what ends up being a more nuanced version of the usual whole Count of Monte Cristo dual identity business, being charming and affable and real in the context of director Craig Gillespie's grime as flourish Epcot version of 1970s London as Estella, and finds the right deliberately over-the-top high-camp diva energy for Cruella. The costuming and makeup, as they need to be, are most impressive, but she's also more sly than most actors get to be in these parts when it comes to switching back and forth for scenes where one persona is being the mask to one degree for the other. Thompson, meanwhile, is really only given one note to play here as essentially the less fun version of Cruella, the brand name one must defeat and displace, but she plays it full and gets what sort of film she's in. Joel Fry and Paul Walter Hauser are likewise more winning than they probably needed to be as Cruella's reimagined henchmen Horace and Jasper. Hauser in particular throws himself into the English hooligan part with serious conviction, while much has been made of John McCrea appearing as something like the third or fourth character in a row now declared to be the first gay character in a Disney movie, in this case as he's playing a British dress shop owner with kind of a Lou Reed Bowie look happening. It's more he's the first gay character to appear in a hello, I'm the gay character costume. It's a good performance and he should have had more screen time. Ditto Mark Strong in his familiar role here as man waiting for people to ask him to reveal the plot of the movie. The folks somewhat left behind are the actors playing Roger and Anita, aka the eventual human heroes of 101 Dalmatians, who genuinely seem to have been invited only so this can sort of claim to be a possible prequel at some point. The question weird projects made at the studio level like this always end up inspiring is, who is this for? But in this case it all seems pretty clear. As a narrative, Cruella starts out unhinged and freewheeling, settles into ambitious, but ends up feeling more compromised, because it's ultimately less a film than a container to hold a performance, which in turn is less of a character than the debut of a new brand concept. In that regard, it mostly succeeds, so call it a 6 out of 10 for doing the job, having some fun with it, and hey, they did throw a lot of authentic 60s and 70s rock music on the soundtrack, so there's that, but it does feel like it could have been more.